Hi, and welcome back to Football Made Simple.
It was a big game between two great rivals and managers in Pep Guardiola and Jurgen Klopp. In the end, City's Anfield curse remained, with a 1-0 loss thanks to a Salah goal, whilst the XG showed it was a deserved win for the Red. But how was Klopp able to engineer this win, and what was with Pep's new tactics? In this video we'll take a look. And we'll begin with Liverpool in possession. And in general, Liverpool built up with a fairly traditional back four. And at times Milner could be the higher of the two fullbacks, but Robertson was just as happy to do a similar job on the left-hand side. And the front shape was not necessarily a 4-3-3, being much more variable, as Salah often looked to come inside alongside Firmino, with Elliott willing to push up on the right-hand side at times, whilst Fabinho and Thiago could form a double pivot, with Elliott also willing to drop in. But in general, Firmino and Salah were the front two, so it was somewhat of a 4-4-2. City didn't necessarily press high, but they did play with a high block and had quite an interesting pressing structure. In times where Liverpool were building up with the single pivot especially, we'll see that Haaland, rather than pressing one of the centre-backs, had the responsibility of sitting deeper on Fabinho. Whilst at the same time in the first half, it was Gundogan and De Bruyne who would push up ahead of him. And Bernardo at the same time would be coming in alongside Rodri so that they formed a double pivot. This could be more effective in the phases where Liverpool did have a single pivot, but that wasn't the case for most of this match, with Fabinho often being joined by Thiago to form a double pivot, in the 4-4-2 as we discussed. In these phases we could see either Bernardo or Rodri drop in alongside Haaland to make the press much more effective. And this could work, but it would feel like somewhat of a temporary fix, because if Haaland was pressing, and Liverpool did get past him, he, as a centre-forward, wouldn't be able to continue tracking the man deep as he progressed with the ball, but would instead have to eventually drop off to maintain his positioning, meaning that this City shape could be a bit shaky at times. So here, Liverpool are building up with more of a single pivot shape, and for City we can see that De Bruyne and Gundogan have pushed ahead of Haaland, who, deeper, is looking to keep his eye on Fabinho. But, as we'll see, Thiago is beginning to come deeper to become the second pivot alongside Fabinho, and thus there'll be a 2 versus 1 against Haaland. So, in situations where this does happen, a City second midfielder, either Rodri or Bernardo, will be willing to push higher up, whilst the other then dropped into more of a defensive midfielder position. But at times, this somewhat narrow City shape, which looked to cover the double pivot, and at the same time have two men still in a protective position, could be difficult at making Liverpool's life more difficult when they look to build through the centre. This, of course, would often force Liverpool into the wide regions, and this is where City's defensive shape began to fall apart. Throughout the match, City's backline was a hybrid of a traditional back four, which would look like this, and a back three, which would change with Ake tucking into left centre-back, and Foden and Cancelo becoming more of the wing-backs. This was usually the case when Liverpool had the ball deeper, so what we would see is that when Robertson or Milner received in these situations, it would then create the room for Foden or Cancelo from their respective wing-back positions to push up high, and at the same time, the back three would shift across. One thing to note is that usually when using a back five, if you have a traditional left back or left wing back playing in this position, when the side shifts across, they would also tuck in. But, of course, Foden is more attack-minded, so he wouldn't tuck in, leaving the shape like this. So again we see City with their pressing three, making it much more difficult for Liverpool to find men in central zones. So the obvious pass is out towards Robertson, who's in space. This is an example where City's shape is more effective, as Cancelo from the wing-back zone easily applies pressure, whilst Haaland and De Bruyne are both cutting the inside pass into the midfield, and this slows down Liverpool and forces them backwards. But the problem that City's shape created was that it was often a 2 versus 1 in wide regions, as you can see with Cancelo up against Jota and Robertson. So what we would often see at times is that Jota would be willing to drop in on this left-hand side to provide an outlet option in the midfield. And to prevent Cancelo pushing too high in these phases, Robertson would also be pushing up beyond him, making it more difficult for Cancelo to do that. This would then often allow Jota to receive and turn, and then look to get the team moving forwards. So here we have a situation where actually Cancelo is looking to perform his usual wing-back duty and apply pressure onto Robertson early. And again, City have their usual pressing shape. But the difference now is that Jota has dropped deep inside of Cancelo so he can receive. And in this case, it is Akanji who has been dragged way out of position. Here we see a slightly different situation but with the same outcome, as Cancelo has moved on to Robertson. This time Robertson makes the run high, dragging Cancelo with him, whilst Jota is dropping into the space. So Jota now has the time and space to receive. But instead of staying with Robertson, Cancelo then looks to press Jota instead, opening up the passing lane for him to find Robertson. Now, as before, it is Akanji who's dragged out of position, looking to compensate. But now Jota can get on the inside for the 1-2, and he can then look to find Firmino, and as we can see, this actually created a temporary 3 versus 2 advantage for Liverpool. But there was also the possibility that when Jota came deep, if he dragged Cancelo, it left a gaping hole in this space. So Van Dijk or any of the defenders could then look to find Robertson, making the run in behind, leading to some dangerous situations. So here we once again see Jota and Robertson, and Jota is looking to drop deep, whilst Robertson is now looking to make the opposite run. So with Cancelo having moved in on Jota, there is the potential for the switch into Robertson making the run. But that's not where the problems ended for City when using this shape. As discussed, Foden is not a traditional left back, so when the defense shifted across, he wouldn't necessarily follow, and would instead still be high, ready to press Milner. So what we often saw is that when Cancelo pressed and the rest of the back three had to shift across, if Liverpool were able to work the ball quickly, it left the potential for Elliott or Salah to make the run into this giant space, leading to many dangerous situations for Liverpool. So, as before, Cancelo is pressing high and Akanji has come across to cover. The presence of Firmino and Salah means that Diaz and Ake also have to cover across. So Elliott is in acres of space and there would have been the potential for a switch to find him. But even in open play, whenever City defended with this back three, there could be problems. This is because whilst Firmino and Salah were technically 2 versus 3 down, Jota would be quick to join in, as was Elliott, meaning that this back three could quickly be overloaded. To make things worse, when they were man-to-man, these 1 versus 1 situations could often reduce it down to how good Liverpool's forwards' movement and coordination could be. So, simple patterns, dragging centre-backs out of position, could lead to Liverpool getting through on goal quite easily, which did happen time and again during this match. This wasn't helped when Liverpool were able to find a wider forward who would initially drag one centre-back out of position, reducing it to a 2 versus 2 with other forwards keen to join in on the attack. And on the transition here we see an example. Ake has been drawn towards the ball as Elliott looks to advance, meaning that there's only 2 centre-backs left behind him. So Diaz is essentially man-to-man with Salah, whilst Jota is man-to-man with Akanji. And both of these forwards are quicker than their respective men. So Salah initially dropped deep to create room behind himself and then make the run into, which Firmino is able to find. This leads to a 1v1, which Ederson does incredibly well to save. Overall, on the ball, Liverpool were highly effective at creating chances fairly often against Pep's shaky defensive shape. But that's not to say it was a masterclass, because as we'll cover in our next video, they themselves could at times look shaky. So, for the tactical score, Klopp earns a 7, not having to do anything particularly spectacular to earn the win, whilst Pep earns a 5. But drop your ratings down below.
But that's all for today, and remember, keep it simple.